Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affairs Analysis for 11 February 2020. These are the articles that we will be dealing today. The first article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled Liberty at the Government's Whim. Now this is regarding a case where the petitioner Mia Abdul Qayyum was a 76-year-old man who was also the president of the Jammu and Kashmir High Court's Bar Association. So he was originally arrested before the union government took the decision on Article 370, citing his prejudice towards the Indian state and his secessionist tendencies. He was detained in a jail for more than 6 months in Agra with a view where the government held that preventive detention is necessary in this case. If we take a look back at the Maneka Gandhi judgment with respect to Article 21 and also other articles like Article 19 and Article 14, we have to understand that judiciary always emphasized to look at fundamental rights not in silos but as interwoven with each other. Now in this context, with respect to the Maneka Gandhi judgment, the Supreme Court has ruled that the right to personal liberty is inalienable, transcendental and available to a person independent of the Constitution, and the right is not to be denied except in extraordinary circumstances. Now what are these extraordinary circumstances? The court did not define those circumstances. However, if we go by this word, preventive detention should have some meaning or at least a context. In the present context, this person Mia Abdul Qayyum already faced detention for the mentioned charges, that is secessionist tendencies as well as prejudice towards Indian government previously. The person also noted that he was suffering from ill health like diabetes, kidney failure and heart problems. So despite appealing in the court to get back his powers of liberty, he was denied such a provision because the court ruled that in the particular case I am talking about, the Mia Abdul Qayyum was the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The court ruled that preventive detention laws are very much required for ensuring law and order in a society. That is the premise on which preventive detention was justified by the High Court. The court opined that Article 22 has laws which are out of the scrutiny of judiciary every single time, and there is certain level of immunity from the limitations placed on the legislature by the other fundamental rights also, because they are very much needed for ensuring the security of the society. Jammu Kashmir came out with the Public Safety Act 1978 during times of Sheikh Abdullah, who introduced this law to detain any person for 2 years without any trail, especially to keep timber smugglers out of the state. So this was described as a lawless law even by the Supreme Court, yet this Public Safety Act continued till date. Now this is not a peculiar case where the present government is using this act to detain dissent, but it is always been the case in Jammu and Kashmir. So the existence of this law in Jammu and Kashmir can be called as an antithesis for the very spirit of the Constitution. We need to apprehend that the model employed will likely to be adopted in other states also. We have to ensure that this trend dies down as soon as possible. A fair trail is a sign of dignity of an individual and the hallmark of civilization in a democracy. If we don't have that, we are undermining the efficacy of our Constitution. That is the gist of this article. The next article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled A Mix Indian Healthcare Can Do Without. Now we know that US healthcare system is one of the most controversial system across the world and it has been debated consistently across the policy circles. India wanted to emulate certain features of the US model, and the Ayushman Bharat program has been slightly inspired from the US model of insurance to deliver healthcare services to its citizens. Now how does Ayushman Bharat work? It intends to create an insurance pool or insure nearly 50 crore poor Indians through empaneled hospitals. Now, what are these empaneled hospitals? They are hospitals recognized by the government of India. In return for the services, they get insurance money directly into their accounts. Now, recently, as many as 171 hospitals were de-empaneled because they were found under some frauds of one kind or the another, and this is the main issue that we have to consider. The cost of healthcare delivery is increasing by and large. Instead of focusing our entire energies on regulation such as containing the manipulation of claims and to see whether any fake electronic cards are issued by these hospitals, we can divert our energies into delivering the infrastructure required for primary healthcare as well as tertiary healthcare. That is the basic premise on which we have to look at and start delivering without actually trying to emulate the US model of healthcare governance. Because if we take a look at the various problems of the US healthcare model itself, we see that more than 50% of the healthcare costs go towards wages. That is, with respect to the healthcare workers, more than 50% is spent in their wages alone. That will leave very little amount for development of infrastructure in a country like India. At the heart of Ayushman Bharat is the emphasis on private sector as a mode of delivery of healthcare. Now, this is a problematic issue because we need to have a very intricate and complex mechanism to regulate these private hospitals because they are always motivated by profits. Rather, the government should ensure that they themselves directly deliver healthcare services. Now, this complex regulatory structure is very burdensome and it is also yielding very little results. As such, India's health to GDP ratio is very low and we spend nearly 1.5 to 1.7% of our GDP on healthcare. Now, we have a high out-of-pocket expenditure for private consumers till 63%, that is for every 100 rupees, 63 rupees comes out of our own pockets. And in this complicated situation, if we want to invest on building infrastructure for this regulatory compliance, we are wasting even more resources. So, this is the gist of this article. We have to emphasize on delivering the basics instead of jumping from one program to another ambitious program without actually delivering results in any of the program. For example, the precursor to Ayushman Bharat was the Rashtriya Swasth Bima Yojana, which failed because of the complexities involved in the insurance sector. We didn't have deep markets to become a feasible market for the insurance model. Now, government is trying to create a framework for this insurance model, and the complex regulatory structure requires huge investment. So, we would rather invest all our resources on creating infrastructure at the grassroots level. The government should not escape from its most basic services like education, healthcare and sanitation. So, the emphasis should be on developing grassroots level infrastructure. That is the gist of this article. The next article for the day is taken from the Indian Express and it is titled The Battle in Beijing. So, this article is written by Mr. Rajmohan and it talks about how the present status of coronavirus and its spread is posing challenges to the hegemony of Chinese dominance in the region as well as the world. One of the long cherished dreams of many of harshest critics of Beijing's policy is to see a China without the Communist Party. Now, the coronavirus epidemic has given these critics an opportunity and they have left no stone unturned to raise voice against the way government is dealing with the present epidemic. Also, the death of a doctor who warned about coronavirus, he is hailed as a whistleblower who was punished for his honesty. However, if we take a close look at China's response, yes, the critics are right partially because China has faltered in its initial response and the lower level bureaucracy has tried to cover up this issue that coronavirus spread is not a huge epidemic and they thought that they can manage this issue. However, they were failed to do so, and this gave an opportunity for Xi Jinping's critics that he is not able to manage this epidemic in a proper manner. But to be fair on the part of the Chinese Communist Party, the leader of the party, Xi Jinping, has stepped up efforts on a war footing to handle this present crisis. If you take a look at the list of various measures that he took, China has taken up certain important measures like closing down Hubei province to avoid spread of coronavirus. There was a 1,000-bed hospital which was constructed in as short period as 9 days. Thousands of doctors were deployed to handle this crisis. All this within a span of 1 week to 10 days. As soon as China realized that they have to ramp up their efforts to contain this spread of virus. Now, in this context, what are the lessons that the world can learn and what are the lessons specifically that India can learn from this? In 2002, a similar pandemic called SARS affected the entire Chinese region and claimed almost 750 lives across the world. Compared with this, coronavirus is much more powerful, and the way China government is dealing with it should be commended, because in contrast, India has only one lab, National Institute of Virology in Pune, which is capable enough to quarantine and understand the level of virus spread across the country. We don't have the required level of manpower or infrastructure facilities to handle such a pandemic. Comparing 2002 crisis with the present crisis is a bit complicated, because if you take a look at China's standing in global economy, compared to 2002, China is much more powerful right now and it is integrated with global value chains. This close integration with the global value chains has forced many countries to stop raising their criticism against China in containing this virus. For example, if you take the case of many Southeast Asian nations, they are concerned about straining the diplomatic stance with China in this time of crisis. That is the reason they denied taking any help from India, even when India offered help to airlift the citizens of countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh or Sri Lanka to help them bring their students back from China to their own countries. They want to show their solidarity with China and ensure that they are not on a wrong foot as far as diplomatic stance is concerned. They don't want to break down ties with China. So, India is the only country which came forward and asked permission from the Chinese Premier to bring their students back. Now, that is the reason why India is also extending their cooperation in containing this virus. However, it is not clear as to the modus operandi, because India itself is not equipped to handle such kind of situations in the country. So, what are the key takeaways? Every pandemic or every epidemic is a cause of global concern, and every such issue can hamper your international image. That is the key takeaway from this crisis. If India wants to be a global leader, it has to build capacities to contain such kind of epidemics. That is the gist of this article. The next article for the day is taken from the Live Mint and it is titled Lessons from How Western Economies Got Ahead of Us. Now, if we take a look at the present global challenges, the most important challenges that developing countries are facing right now at this present moment is the global epidemic of coronavirus, and the secondly, it is the increasing intensity of climate change, where you see a pattern where warm climate is getting warmer and in the colder season the winters are getting harsher. Now, across the world, the climate change forecasting models are not able to explain why this phenomenon is occurring faster than it was anticipated, and this has resulted in divergence of middle income countries from the average global economic growth, and the convergence is getting delayed. Despite the fact that India and China had been one of the largest economies in the 19th century, how did the present developed countries get ahead of us? The answer lies in the nature of the functioning of the state. The reason behind success of most of the developed economies is proactive interventionism exhibited by the governments. If you take the case of British, in the first industrial revolution age, it is the excessive tariffs and the excise imposed by the government which caused the splurge in the global level trade and increased dominance of British across different dominions, and that is the reason why British Empire was called as the empire where the sun never sets, to imply that it had so many territories across the world through its imperialistic regime. So, to put it more crudely, war is used as a pretext to improve economic status. Now, in the present times, there has been a conspiracy that coronavirus is induced by the West in China to stop their global dominance. Now, this biological warfare can be a conspiracy or it is total hoax, but that is not relevant. What is definitely relevant is the present governments are using trade as a form of war. We can see this in the form of trade wars between US and China, where free trade in goods was never axiomatic but just episodic, meaning there were only certain instances where we have seen free trade without intervention from the governments to ensure that they have a competitive edge. Now, if we take a look at the British formula for industrial development in the 19th and 20th century, there were certain common characters exhibited even by Japan and China in 20th and 21st century. What are these characters? Let us have a look. Some of the important facets of British economy in industrial era was dominance of domestic industry over imports. They had a keen skill for imitation, especially of the Indian products like Dhaka, muslin, etc. So, even in the 21st century and 20th century, China has imitated this model. There has been a rise in tariffs and African labor was utilized very efficiently. Even China and Japan adopted this model of low labor rates, and this is the reason why they could produce goods very economically. They used their resources very efficiently. Coal, in the case of British, Japan as well as China, they utilized their resources very efficiently. They showcased their military dominance, British in the form of imperialism and China in the form of checkbook diplomacy that we see right now. They almost hold a monopoly of trade. British that did that in the 19th century, and China and Japan had did that in 20th and 21st century respectively. And most importantly, they had a very effective mechanism to collect taxes. Now, India can learn from all these practices and emulate certain models because India wants to be a global power. If India wants to reduce the gap between these developed countries and ourselves, we have to adopt certain measures. The most important one among them is nurturing the domestic industry and protecting it from imports. When we say we have to nurture the domestic industry, it doesn't mean that we have to let them thrive at low productivity. The most important thing we have to note here is we have to increase our productivity and efficiency. We have to give certain amount of time for letting the domestic industry nurture, and we have to do that on a priority basis. That is the gist of this article. That's it for the day. Thank you.